So welcome back, and we are going to be looking at chapter 4 of the book of Job today. So you're welcome back to Explore the Word podcast, where we do just that. And if you're tuning in for the first time, you're welcome to. Chapter 4, verse 1. Then Eliphaz the Temanite answered and said, so this is in response to because what we have in chapter 3 was Job talking about his situation and saying that he wished he was dead, and he said he would have been better off dead, and also cursing the day he was born. So this is now his friend responding to that. They said, if one attempts the word with you, will you become weary? But who can withhold himself from speaking? Surely you have instructed many, and you have strengthened the weak hands. Your words have upheld him who was stumbling, and you have strengthened the feeble knees. But now it comes upon you, and you are weary. It touches you, and you are troubled. There are two things that occurred to me while reading this part. The first is the fact that his friend now, in response to what Job said, as if, oh, so now something's happened to you, and it's as if he's saying you're complaining. But you used to be in a position where you will counsel people, you will strengthen people that have weak hands, you would support people. And so it's as if he was trying to say to Job, don't complain. It's your turn to suffer loss. Just take it. Well, maybe there's some element of truth in that. However, I think the scale of calamity that came on Job, remember, he lost all his properties, he lost his business, he lost, so to say, his livelihood, and on top of that, he lost 10 children. I cannot imagine that happening to anybody, how somebody would survive that. And on top of that, he now has health challenges. It was after all of this that Job, started saying what he said. So I'm not quite sure his friend, this Eliphaz, is in a position to say to Job, don't complain. I'm not saying that Job should complain, but I'm still saying as well that I don't think that he's in a position to do that. My second point is the fact that this proves, because it is a testimony. He was saying that, oh, Job, you were this to people. When people needed help, you were there. When they needed them to be strengthened, you were there. When they needed counsel, you did it. So in a sense, it's a testimony to the character of Job. Because remember that at the very beginning, the book of Job opened with the description of Job's character. So this is testifying to the fact that he was an upright man, a man that was godly, and godliness means that you will be supporting the weak, which he was doing. Let's carry on reading. So it says, but now it comes upon you, and you are weary. Okay, I've read that. Verse 6. It's not your reverence, your confidence, and the integrity of your ways, your hope. I'm not quite sure I understand what it means there. Anyway, let's carry on. Remember now, whoever perished being innocent. Wow. Or where were the upright ever cut off? Even as I have seen, those who plow iniquity and sow trouble reap the same. By the blast of God they perish, and by the breath of his anger they are consumed. Now, I think where this man is driving at is this. I have a feeling that he's hinting that Job was not innocent and that God is just, because he said, remember now, whoever perished being innocent. In other words, he's reaping what he sowed. That God is not unjust to allow a just person, an upright person, to suffer this kind of loss. He said, or where were the upright cut off? In other words, the good people are not cut off. That expression cut off, I have seen it in other places in scripture, and it always means like a violent end or abrupt end to somebody's life. So I can only imagine that maybe he was talking about Job's children, that because they're young, Job is still alive, so it's not him cut off, but suggesting that Job's children were not righteous, so that's why they've been cut off. And to buttress that, he said, even as I have seen, those who plow iniquity and sow trouble reap the same. So this is the principle of sowing up and reaping, suggesting that this thing that's happened, it has a cause, and the cause is sin. But you and I know, because we have the full picture now, that these things that have happened to Job has nothing to do with sin, because the Lord considered him to be upright. Anyway, let's carry on reading. So he said, by the blast of God they perish, and by the breath of his anger they are consumed. The roaring of the lion, the voice of the fierce lion, and the teeth of the young lions are broken. The old lion perishes, but for lack of prey, and the corpse of the lioness are scattered. So this is trying to talk about as if everything's happened, and there's a consequence, and the consequence is the consequence of sin is punishment, or this kind of thing that have happened. In other words, saying there's no fire without smoke. That's what it's trying to say. Now, a word was secretly brought to me. So carrying on, Eliphaz in verse 12 says, now a word was secretly brought to me, and my ear received a whisper of it, in disquieting thoughts from the visions of the night. When deep sleep falls on men, fear came upon me, and trembling, which made all my bones shake. Then a spirit passed before my face, the hair on my body stood up. It stood still, but I could not discern its appearance. A form was before my eyes, and there was silence. Then I heard a voice saying. So what he's saying here is that he had an encounter, a spiritual encounter, maybe a vision, or I think he says a vision, in disquieting thoughts from the vision of night. So maybe he was sleeping, and he's trying to say that he got a message from this encounter with this being. And let's see what the message is. Before we look at the message, I'm not quite sure I like the experience he's describing here, because I think if one had an experience with a spirit that is clean, you're not likely to have this kind of strange feeling. I know of people that have seen the Lord, people that have had visions, people that have seen angels, and it's not this kind of terrifying experience that they have. So I don't know if this encounter that Eliphaz is describing is with a clean spirit. Anyway, let's see what he said. So the message is this: can a mortal be more righteous than God? Can a man be more pure than his maker? If he puts no trust in his servants, if he had charged his angels with error, how much more those who dwell in clay houses of clay, whose foundation is in dust, who are crushed before a moth. Now, what I would say about this is that, going by this message, this person or this messenger is saying to Eliphaz that men cannot be more righteous than God. We all know that that's not news. We know that we're not in any way, shape or form at the level that the Lord is. So that's nothing new. Can a man be more pure than his maker? That's the same thing. We know that. Now, this is the bit I'm not quite sure. I think I agree with, because it says, if he puts no trust in his servants regarding to the Lord, his servants, If he charges his angels with error, how much more those who dwell in houses of clay? In other words, humans. I'm not quite sure I agree with that, because from the way the Lord made, made man. The Lord made man in his own image. I have made above videos on this channel where I talked about the fact that I did a series on the fact that we are special to God, and I'm working on a book, on that topic as well, using some of those videos that I've made. And my understanding, what I try to bring out in that series, is the fact that when God, looking through creation, the pronouncement he made on his the pronouncement that God made on the living things, if you compare the pronouncement, the blessing, to the blessing he gave to man, you see a difference in what the Lord expects, or the blessing, the content of the blessing. That's number one. When you look at the way man was made, compare it to the way other living things like animals, he called the animals, the ones in the sea and the land, he called them out. But when it came to man, God first said unto the other members of the Trinity, come, let us make man in our image, in our likeness. And after them, the Lord formed man from the dust of the earth. So you can see where this is going, where it says in verse 19, how much more those who dwell in houses of clay, whose foundation is in the dust, who were crushed before the moth. Okay, no, that's not what I was meaning there. But what I'm trying to say is that when God formed man, he formed it out of the dust of the earth. And that was not the end. He then breathed into his nostril. So man became a living soul. So that differentiates us from other animals. Forget about the fact that scientists will classify human beings as animals. Now, it didn't stop there. The distinction did not stop there. We know that Satan rebelled in heaven, and a third of the angels rebelled with him, and they were cast down from heaven. But when man sinned, what did God do? He gave man a second chance. Gave man a second chance. Why? Because I want to believe that we are special to him, because we are made in his image. We're not told that the angels are made in his image. And then if we look in the book of Psalms, I think it's in Psalm 8, where the psalmist was saying that, what is man that thou art mindful of him? You have made him a little lower than angels, yet you put him in charge of all the other creatures, the creation of your creation. God did not do that to angels. That tells you that yes, we may be less magnificent than angels. God made us in his image, and that means that he's put us in a special position where compared to the other beings that he created. So here, for this person to say that this is the message, that if can a mortal be more righteous than God, can a man be more pure than his maker? If he puts no trust in his servants, if he charges his angels with error, how much more those who dwell in houses of clay, which is us, which is humans. That, in other words, is trying to compare man to angels. That is a no-go area, because God did not put us in comparison with angels. So I doubt very seriously the vision of this man, where he's coming from, for the things that fall in him. What do you think? First, about this man, Eliphaz, about what he thought with regards to the cause of Job's problem or the situation. And I think maybe, what do you think as well about this vision that he's saying that he's had? So, Carrying on from verse 19, it says, how much more those who do, oh, we've read that. And verse 20, he said, they are broken in pieces from morning till evening. They perish forever with no one regarding. Does not their own excellence go away? They die even without wisdom. So is he suggesting that all humans die without wisdom? I'm not quite sure. But whatever the case is, we know that this man is trying to say that Job sinned, and that's why this is come upon him. In the next episode, we're going to be looking at chapter 5 of Job. So, God bless. So, thank you for spending time with me today. And if you have enjoyed this episode, please share with your friends and like it. And I hope to see you next time. And if you want to look at some more of my content, I will leave my YouTube channel address in the show notes for you to access. So see you next time. Bye.